All right, so back in the studios for another edition of the FITSNews Week in Review. We got a lot to cover this week. We're going to go back into the Bowen Turner saga out of Orangeburg, South Carolina, which has captivated national attention over the last 7 days. We're going to go into a superintendent of education debate that this news outlet attended and broadcast down in Bluffton, South Carolina. We're going to talk about the latest in the Murdaugh murders, crime and corruption saga. There are several major updates in that ongoing narrative. We're going to talk a little bit about Twitter and Elon Musk and whether that might mean a return of Sick Willie, myself, to social media. We'll see. And also, we've got a little bit of viewer feedback at the end of this episode. So a lot to cover. Stay tuned for the Week in Review. All right, so we're going to start this week's episode where we started last week's, which is the case of Bowen Turner, the 19-year-old Orangeburg, South Carolina man who was given probation last week by a South Carolina circuit judge, despite the fact that he's facing his third charge of criminal sexual assault. Now, these alleged assaults took place over a period of roughly a year, beginning in late 2018, ending in the middle of 2019. Now, Turner, his father was a former investigator with the South Carolina First Circuit, and that was one of the reasons that First Circuit Solicitor David Pascoe recused himself from this case. But we've actually found out that there were other reasons Pascoe recused himself, including relationships with families of the victims and relationships with his children and some of the families of the victims. So Solicitor Pascoe recused himself. The case was sent to the office of Second Circuit Solicitor Strom Thurmond, who stepped down from his office a few years ago and was replaced by a guy named Bill Weeks. Now, Bill Weeks has had a bad week, and Bill Weeks should have had a bad week because his office did not handle this case well at all. At all. And a big part of the problem is an issue that this news outlet has been covering extensively, and it involves just the way that victims are treated, the way that victimizers are treated, the way that defendants are given all sorts of latitude, but victims are literally told to walk this narrow line, and if you step out of line just 1 millimeter, we can't try your case. Your case is screwed. But this case has all the elements of corruption in South Carolina that this news outlet's been covering. We've got, a judge who's on holdover status, basically, who's on the special retired status, who's basically double dipping in his salary. We've got a powerful lawyer legislator, Brad Hutto, the minority leader of the Senate, the ranking Democrat in the South Carolina Senate. We've got chronic system failures when it comes to monitoring defendants of alleged violent crimes who are out on bond. Bowen Turner violated his GPS monitoring, his house arrest, more than 50 times, people. 50 times. His ass should have been hauled into jail the first time he violated that. But no, there were absolutely no consequences. Absolutely no consequences. And literally all he got when it was time to plead this case was probation on an assault charge. He doesn't even have to register as a sex offender, people. If he completes his probation, won't even have to register as a sex offender. Meanwhile, we've got 3 victims, 3 families, wondering where the justice is. Well, we're wondering too. Although if you read this news outlet, if you listen to this show, you're sad but not surprised at this sort of outcome because, again, it's the kind of thing we have been covering way too many times. Way too many times. In fact, I want to take you back to last spring when a teenage girl allegedly raped in a hotel in Florence, South Carolina, by a famous rapper named Kodak Black. Now, this victim agreed because the prosecutor basically was a punk and wasn't willing to fight for this poor girl. She agreed to allow the rapper to plead to a lesser charge. The only thing she wanted was for her statement about what happened to her to be read in court. That was it. Did that happen? No. The judge and the prosecutor got together with the famous rapper's lawyers, and everybody agreed that the statement would be read in a side room with no cameras, no media, and that it would not be entered into the public record. So literally the one thing that this victim asked for while she was agreeing to allow this hero to so many young people, while allowing this guy to plead, the one thing she asked for, she was denied. But there are countless stories like that, folks. It's not just the Kodak Black case. It's not just this case involving Bowen Turner. We see these things happen all the time, and it is a fundamental system failure. And you want to know where it starts? I'm going to tell you where it starts. It starts with the General Assembly of South Carolina, with the legislative branch of government in South Carolina, with the lawmakers who not only screen judicial candidates so they can pick out any potential opponents to their favored judges and make sure that they don't even get a chance to run, but after that, they elect them. So they screen them and they elect them in the legislature. Where's the accountability there? Easy. Nowhere. There is no accountability. South Carolina is one of only 2 states in the country that does it this way. And again, for years, my news outlet has argued for reform of that process. At the very least, we should have the governor of South Carolina make those appointments so there's a direct line of accountability to the people. In fact, I'm all for public elections at this point. Let's elect our judges so that they're directly accountable to the public. And every bit as importantly, something else this news outlet's been talking about for years, let's have recall elections on those judges so that after a year, 2 years in office, if they pull crap like this, re-victimizing victims, giving violent criminals every coddling, every opportunity to get off, then there are consequences. We can throw them out of office without having to wait 4 years or even 2 years. You can tell I get a little passionate about this. And you should get passionate about it too, because again, it's not just about these victims. It's about public safety. But before we get into that bigger debate, I want you to take a minute and hear from one of those victims. Chloe Bess, one of Bowen Turner's victims, spoke with us this week. And she talked about what happened to her. There's some clips of that already posted on the news outlet. And if you listen to Mandy Matney's podcast, you heard some of them as well. But Chloe Bess talked to us about not only what happened to her, how it impacted her life, how it's impacted her family. And I wanted to take a minute to cut to one of those clips right now.
It's one of those things you don't think it's going to happen until it happens to you. So I'm trying to cope with that. I mean, this is stuff you hear about in movies or documentaries and stuff, and now it has become my life. So it was a lot for me at first. I fortunately have an amazing family. They are they're my rock. And so if I didn't have that, I don't know what I would have done. So they definitely helped a lot to comfort me and make sure that we were taking the right steps to, do what was right for this process. And with me being so young, they handled most of the bigger things, legal stuff, things like that. So I fortunately didn't have to really, it was still a lot, but I had a lot of help and support. So that kind of put my mind at ease. The community, though, his friends, they did not treat me so nice after this came out. Our house got egged 3 times. And it's a very small town. So anytime I went out, I would run into somebody, social media posts being made, Snapchat, Instagram, you name it. And so that's all in my face.
Attacking you. They were attacking you.
Yes. And making posts, posting pictures of Bowen being free Bowen. The liars will get what they deserve, stuff like that. And that's very hard to read when you're sitting there knowing what happened.
I want to thank Chloe, and I also want to thank her father, Darren Best. Now, Darren Best was a pastor here in South Carolina. Their family had to leave the state because of what happened. And in talking with Dr. Best, one of the things that I was most impressed by was he literally articulated the reform agenda. Not only did he talk about exactly what the problem is, he articulated what we needed to do to fix it. And I want to hear from him now. Let's cut to that clip of Dr. Best.
There certainly needs to be some reform in how the judiciary system elects or appoints judges. It seems very dangerous to have the person in a courtroom who sits on the committee, some maybe even at points chairs the committee for those judiciary appointments, arguing a court case, because it seems to me like what it sets up is an environment where the person sitting on the bench owes the senator a thank you for his position that he's in or she is in. And the person out there who is the solicitor or the prosecutor or whatever, if they ever have a hope of sitting on a bench or being appointed to a judgeship, well, they certainly better not irritate or piss off the person who's involved in those appointments. So it seems like some reform needs to happen in that regard. I'd also like to see some reform when it comes to bond, the issue related with bond, and that maybe some ankle monitoring, if they're going to do that, to take that seriously and to give that some teeth legislatively so that victims can have some justice in that regard. And then finally, I would just say, I think there needs to be some legislation that literally prohibits solicitors from minimizing or decriminalizing these very serious violent offenses to something like assault and battery. So that's what I would be willing to work for. That's what I'm fired up about, is to try and bring some changes about that way.
Once again, I want to thank Dr. Best. I want to thank Chloe for their willingness to talk to us. They aren't the only victims in this particular case that we're going to be speaking to. In fact, we're in the process of producing I guess you'd call it a mini documentary related to this story, because the more that we dug into it, just the more we found. And the more we realized that this is a case study of the systemic corruption within the South Carolina judicial branch of government, which again is a wholly owned subsidiary of the state legislature. And folks, let me tell you, if you're as sick of it as I am, it's time to do something about it. There are primary elections on June 14 in South Carolina, just a few months away, June 14. Any candidate from either party that is asking for your vote, make damn sure that they are on board with judicial reform. Make damn sure that they are never again going to vote for a judge who pulls crap like this, who allows a violent offender like this to get off with a slap on the wrist while these families are left to suffer. Not only what happened to them, but the fact that they were re-victimized by the very system that was supposed to get them justice. And again, once you can tell, it's near and dear to me, because this is a fight we've been fighting for years at FITSNews. While the mainstream media just pats the judges on the back, doesn't even mention who the powerful lawyer legislators are, we've been pushing for accountability, and we're going to continue to do that. So stay tuned for much more on FITSNews on this Bowen Turner story in the weeks to come. So we went down to Bluffton, South Carolina this week. I took my trusty camera here. Yeah, boy, I'm better at this than you are, Dylan. What am I saying? Oh, wait a minute. No, that's blurry. Never mind. Anyway, we took all of our cameras down to Bluffton, South Carolina, because FITSNews covered a debate this week. Like Simon and Garfunkel, we went to the candidates' debate, people. It was awesome. Bluffton, by the way, beautiful town, great town, South Carolina low country, absolutely gorgeous. So at this debate, 4 of the original 12, now 10 candidates for Superintendent of Education, Republicans, participated. The event was sponsored by the Beaufort County Republican Party, which graciously allowed us to film the entire thing, post it on our website, and obviously cover it very closely and comment on all the issues, all the candidates who were there. And it was an interesting discussion. A lot of interesting issues in this race, folks. But first, I think it's important to talk a little bit about this office. And if you're unfamiliar with South Carolina, power in this state pretty squarely rests with the legislature. In fact, in the segment we just covered, we talked about how our judicial branch is essentially a wholly owned subsidiary of our legislature, of the legislative branch, because we're one of only 2 states where the legislature appoints the judges with disastrous results. But the same is true when it comes to education. Education policy, particularly funding, and if you go through the budget and look at all the various provisos or spending instructions, a lot of policy, in addition to the funding, it's all controlled by the legislature. when you get to the local level, power is vested in the school boards. So what does the superintendent do? Well, maybe let's see for a minute. Do they do accountability? No, there's actually a separate agency for that, the South Carolina Education Oversight Board. And then in addition to that, you've got a school board, which oversees curriculum and a bunch of other things. So what does the superintendent of education actually do? Right. Nonetheless, there are a bunch of people that want this office. And one of the interesting things is that to get this office, which again doesn't seem to do very much, you have to have a master's degree. And this is kind of an interesting narrative to this race, because the woman who is arguably the front runner for the Republican nomination, a woman named Elon Weaver, very smart, very well-connected. She's run a think tank with Jim DeMint, the former U.S. Senator, very connected with lawmakers, knows the legislative process, very experienced candidate, but she doesn't have a master's degree, which according to state law would render her ineligible to run for this office. Now, Weaver, during the debate, was hit with this, and there was some discussion. I want to cut real quick to a clip of that. Let's take a look.
We need to be sure to elect a candidate who meets the qualifications of the office as prescribed by law, and we cannot take a chance on electing an unqualified candidate in our primary. We must be sure our candidate meets the qualifications of the South Carolina Code of Laws and not risk this office going to a Democrat. That is a fear that I have, that we elect an unqualified candidate and then that person is not qualified on November the 8th, and this office could potentially go to a Democrat because our candidate is not qualified.
We need a superintendent who has a strong backbone, but who has a listening ear and can build the consensus that it is going to take to move education in South Carolina forward. I believe that I am that candidate. I believe that my life experience qualifies me to do this, as well as the educational attainment that I will have to comply with the candidate oath of office that I very proudly took. I'm a Republican. I believe in the rule of law, and I will fulfill the rules.
Okay, now I spoke with Weaver after the debate, and she told me that she will be in compliance with all state law on the day of the November election, basically saying that when voters go to the polls in November, she will have a master's degree. Now, how's that going to happen within 5 months? I got my master's degree, 2.5 years, I think it was. Maybe it was only 2 years. I can't remember. I was a little hazy. Yeah, that's right. Now, we don't actually have a joint in the studio. For those of you listening on the podcast, I actually gave that up 15 years ago, so there you go. But at the time I was in grad school. Anyway, will Weaver qualify? We'll have to see. One of her rivals at the debate indicated there might be a legal challenge to her candidacy based on this requirement. So we're going to keep very close eyes on that and whether or not Weaver's status on the ballot ends up being challenged. So that could be a very interesting development as this race moves forward. But we really had a good time going down to Bluffton and covering this event. There were a lot of issues that were addressed: school choice, education funding. The candidates discussed critical race theory extensively, which is something this news outlet has covered in great detail. So it was just a good conversation, and we were proud to film it. We're proud to bring it to you and post the whole thing. If you want to watch the whole debate, it's going to be on our website, FITSNews.com. And also the review of that debate is up there as well. But we're going to keep a close eye on those residency issues. And we're also going to keep a close eye on another important issue in this race. One of the candidates who's running for the Republican nomination, there are questions as to whether her GOP credentials are quite as good as she says they are. And I'm referring to Kathy Manis. Now, Kathy came up to me to this event, chatted me a great deal for calling her a liberal and for running an ad on our website that apparently calls her a liberal. I haven't even looked at it yet, but apparently calls her a liberal. She was adamant that she's not. However, during the debate, it was interesting when the subject turned to school choice. Kathy didn't have anything really good to say about out of public school choice or private school choice. Basically, she said all school choice has to stay within the government-run system, which, folks, that's not really school choice. But anyway, another subject for another day. But Kathy Manis has been counting on the support of the left of center teachers unions as she campaigns in the Republican nomination, hoping that these liberal voters will cross over and support her the way they supported the current incumbent, of this race, Molly Spearman, who's not running for a third term. Spearman was elected with the help of the support of these left of center teachers union votes. But one of the leaders of this teachers union, SC for Ed, Red for Ed, basically the National Teachers Union, is actually running in the Democratic primary on the same day as the GOP primary. So a lot of those votes that Kathy Manis was probably counting on, those people are probably going to vote in the Democratic primary. So that could help if you believe, again, in a more right-leaning view. If you want a more right-leaning candidate to occupy this office, then that could end up having an impact because, again, if a lot of Democratic voters are staying in the Democratic primary, then that bodes well for a more conservative candidate in the Republican primary. But again, we'll keep a close eye on that as this race moves forward. And more importantly, we will keep a closer eye on the very important education issues that are being covered in this race. So stay tuned for a lot more of that on FITSNews. We covered a lot this week on the Murdaughs, and it started with a story I wrote earlier this week on the Stephen Smith investigation and the fact that there has been some significant motion in that inquiry. And in fact, it's actually two inquiries. There's an investigation into what happened to Stephen Smith, and then there's the investigation into the allegations of obstruction of justice that followed. So two distinct investigations. And from what my sources tell me, there has been a lot of progress in both of those inquiries. And basically, we're just at the point where we're waiting on the grand jury to have time to hear all of that evidence and then issue indictments. So we're going to be closely following that. Now, as we talk about what actually happened to Stephen Smith, though, there was something really interesting that happened this week. We were able to sit down with a team of forensic experts who heard our call for an independent inquiry of the autopsy for Stephen Smith and took us up on it. Came to South Carolina, walked the scene, viewed the documents, talked to witnesses, talked to people about what happened in this case. Shannon Ferguson and her team, kind enough to come down, had a great interview with them. They came on set. And again, they weren't able to share much because they're very protective of their sources, of who they spoke with. Like the investigators on this case, they have the same goal. They want to find the truth. They want to find out what happened. But it was really cool to see them work. All three of them, forensic experts, one even an active crime scene investigator, one a professor of forensic pathology. So just an incredibly gifted team. And we were so grateful to have them. If you want to watch that whole video, that whole interview with Shannon and her team, you can check that out on FITSNews. We'll put that in the show notes for this edition, so you can check that out. But looking forward to seeing what they're able to uncover in the Stephen Smith case over the coming weeks. Now, another Murdaugh-related news, we had some people making some financial moves, some people who are looking as though they're going to be at the heart of this inquiry, or at the very least have some criminal exposure to it. Now, we know that Alec Murdaugh is facing a slew of charges, dozens of charges, alleging that he took millions of dollars from former clients while working at the PMPED law firm in Hampton. But last month, the first co-conspirator in the financial crimes was named, and that was Corey Fleming, an attorney out of Beaufort, South Carolina. Now, this week, we saw some interesting moves made by one of Fleming's law partners. In fact, the founder of that firm, which is now called Moss Coon, they dropped the Fleming, right? It's kind of like the Murdaugh firm. You just, you get in trouble, just change the name of the firm. It's okay. People forget, right? It's just South Carolina. We're just South Carolina lawyers, nothing crooked going on here. Right? Anyway, yes, there's a lot crooked going on here, people, in case you didn't listen to the first segment of this show. In fact, I'm trying to find something straight going on in this state. I'm trying to find something that ain't crooked. Anyway, the founding partner of Corey Fleming's firm, a guy named James Moss, I think it's James, maybe it's John, I don't know. The guy, he's 80-something years old, on his way out, but somehow this Moss character gets a mortgage in the amount of $1.2 million on his home. And folks, guess when the mortgage note is due? August of 2090. That's right, 2090. This guy's 80 years old. I did the math. He will be 150, right, by the time his mortgage is due, okay? So why does an attorney, very successful attorney, at the end of his career suddenly need $1.2 million? I don't know. Meanwhile, Russell Lafitte from the Palmetto State Bank, another institution that's mixed up with the Murdaughs and this financial scamming and fleecing of former clients, put his house up. Again, I don't know. But some people are making moves, and it looks like they're looking to get some cash to handle maybe some high-powered criminal defense bills. Because, folks, criminal defense lawyers in South Carolina don't come cheap, like Jim Griffin and Dick Harpootlian. Oh, I'm sorry. They say they're working for free, don't they? Never mind. We'll address that in another episode. But some serious assets being moved around, folks. And speaking of assets being moved around, also related to the Murdaughs this week, I did a report, landed just yesterday, Friday, addressing some very curious financial moves in one of the settlements involving Alec Murdaugh and Corey Fleming, the two criminally charged attorneys, that involved some money flowing into Murdaugh's law firm that we didn't know about previously. And I'm told that investigators and prosecutors looking into this have specifically asked for the information that we covered because they believe that it is going to lead to this scandal metastasizing into another law firm. And more than likely, it's going to be that Moss Coon law firm we discussed earlier. But the more we dig on this case, the further the tentacles go, people. The deeper the corruption goes, the bigger this scam goes. And again, remember, it's not just state investigators and prosecutors looking into the Murdaughs and this network of institutional corruption and malfeasance down there. Federal prosecutors are on this case too. So there's going to be just hundreds of charges by the time it's all said and done. Just this web, again, of criminal activity down there that, again, had been operating unmolested for decades, literally for decades. So we will continue to keep an eye on all of those different lines of inquiry at FITSNews. And also, the other thing we'll be doing as it relates to the Murdaughs, we're going to be standing up for transparency when it comes to getting records related to this case. And there was a big development on that front this week, a very big development. Liz Farrell, our executive editor, chronicled it in one of her columns, which addressed a decision by Richland County to hold off on releasing any additional jailhouse calls from Alec Murdaugh. These are the calls between him and his family members where they discuss the various scams he's got going behind bars. Apparently this guy's addicted to scamming, basically. Can't seem to stop. He's scamming for beef sticks and Tylenol behind bars. But apparently Richland County initially had planned to release additional jailhouse calls involving Alec Murdaugh, but they decided against it because Murdaugh's attorneys, Harpootlian and Griffin, filed a temporary restraining order or a request for a temporary restraining order in federal court. And the county apparently now doesn't want to get sued. So they're declining to release any of this information until that matter is resolved. Now, are they correct? No. Again, they've already released this information, so they're already liable. They're not going to be more liable for releasing other tapes, right? But anyway, we're going to continue to follow that, and we're going to continue to push for transparency as it relates to this call, much different than what you're hearing from the mainstream press in South Carolina and the South Carolina Press Association. And I want to point that out because, again, I'm a believer that there's enough clicks for everybody. When people in this business break news, I credit them. I cite the reporter. I cite the news outlet. And I link to their story. It's 3 links, people. Because I believe there's enough clicks for all of us. And if other people do good work, I'm going to credit them. And the Press Association and the other mainstream media outlets, guys, it's time to get on the same team here. Okay? It's time to do your job and join us in the fight for transparency for these Murdaugh records. But again, we're going to continue to follow all these various fronts on the Murdaugh crime and corruption saga. Myself, News Director Mandy Matney, Executive Editor Liz Farrell, and Dylan Nolan, our Director of Special Projects. Our news team is going to continue to stay on top of all these angles as this case moves forward. And in fact, look for some breaking news on the Murdaugh case next week. All right, so for those of you who have been following the website over the last couple weeks, you will notice that we've been unveiling a new feature called the Fits Feed. And it's kind of cool. It's kind of a catch-all. We cover little news briefs, reader reactions, commentary. We cover statements that people send us that maybe aren't quite big enough for a full story, but they're important news nonetheless. And so we publish this thing called the Fits feed that incorporates all those little things. So the format started basically because I was mad at Twitter, because Twitter decided to suspend FITSNews' official account based on a very hypocritical interpretation of its, woke kind of left of center bias, right? Which is something they've been doing for years now. It was shadow banning first, then they started sort of, censoring accounts. Then they started actually blocking accounts for sharing news they didn't like, particularly in the run-up to the 2020 election. But anyway, all of this completely counter to what Twitter claimed that it was going to be about, which was always defaulting to the basic human right of free expression. That's what former Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey said before the U.S. Congress back in 2018, which obviously has turned out to be utter and complete BS. Anyway, we've covered over the last few weeks, like a lot of other media outlets in the country, across the country, a bid by Elon Musk, the richest man in the world and a relentless advocate for free speech, to take over Twitter, to buy Twitter out. And think about that for a second. How cool is that? Don't like Twitter? I'll buy them. We'll fix that. But what I love about what Musk is doing is he doesn't care about the money. He said he don't want to make money off Twitter. He just wants it to realize its potential as what it used to be, a driver of the marketplace of ideas, not some woke leftist censor. And Musk is willing, to his credit, to put $42 billion of his own money into doing that. Now, will he be successful? Not sure. He's submitted a bid with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission to buy every share of Twitter for $54.20. Again, I'm wondering if Elon Musk, we had a little marijuana joke earlier in the show. And once again, I'm not smoking pot. I'm not Joe Rogan. I'm not smoking pot. I quit smoking pot in 2000 something. It's hazy. It's 4, 6, 8. No. Anyway, Musk's bid needs to be taken seriously, people. But whether Twitter is sold to Elon Musk or not, what needs to be taken most seriously is a commitment to a true free exchange. And again, there's certainly limits to free speech, right? You can't threaten to kill people. You can't, there are limits to free speech, right? But if you're going to establish those limits, here's the thing. You've got to enforce them for everybody. The same rules have to apply to everybody. You can't selectively enforce them based on one ideology versus another, based on one race versus another, based on one gender versus another, assuming we have two genders. I always thought we had two genders. These days, who the hell knows? But here's the point. Set your rules and enforce them fairly. And that's what pissed me off when I got kicked off of Twitter, is that I looked on Twitter the very next day. There's a bunch of other people doing the same thing on their feeds. It's just that the discrimination or the bias or the, whatever the offending behavior was, it was going from right to left, not left to right. Okay? Or it was going from white to black, not black to white. And again, that's BS, people. That's sort of hypocritical, woke censorship. It's what's wrong with this country. Wrong is wrong and right is right. It doesn't matter what sex you are, what color you are, what you identify as. Right is right, wrong is wrong. And if you're going to have rules, you got to enforce them fairly. Twitter isn't doing that, and that's why I haven't been engaging. We will auto-post our stuff, sure. There are people who get their news, their FITSNews, they get it off of Twitter. I'm not going to not post our articles there. So we've been doing that. And Dylan makes fun of me for, sending the random emojis on stories. I will do that. I will randomly emoji when I feel like it, But again, I hadn't spoken more than a word on that platform, since they banned me. And nor will I, until they get somebody like Musk in there who is going to restore it to what it should be, which is, a platform in the marketplace of ideas. And that's what I want to point out before we go here, before we get into the final section where we go through feedback. I want to point this out. FITSNews will always be a part of the marketplace ideas where everyone has a say. And I want to make that perfectly clear. Because yes, obviously, if you listen to this show, you read the website, of course I'm trying to convince you of things. I have opinions, I have views, I study and I research, I try to learn as much as I can about these things so that I can share informed commentary with you. But ultimately, I'm not here. My job is not to convince you that what I believe is right. My job is to host a conversation where we hopefully together get to what's right. Through that conversation, through that back and forth, through the sharing of ideas. And that's why anybody, and you see that every article on FITSNews has this at the end of it. If you've got a thought, if you've got a response, if you've got a comment, a criticism, or another take on the issue entirely, send it to us. We'll run it. We'll run it. And again, unlike the mainstream press that buries the criticism of them on page 13 of some print edition that nobody reads, we will publish your criticisms front and center, every bit as prominently as the news that we publish. Again, because that is what the open marketplace demands. It's what it demands. And if I'm going to put my thoughts out there, and if I'm going to be willing to criticize people and call them out, then they have every opportunity to come on my platform and call me out. And so again, I would encourage everybody with a take like that to take me up on that opportunity. And again, hopefully Twitter will figure out that that's the way that you should conduct yourself in the marketplace of ideas, whether it's through Elon Musk buying it or some other mechanism. All right, so we're going to close today's show with some feedback, which I thought was interesting because we get a lot of it. And every once in a while, one kind of sticks out. So I wanted to read a couple of them. Sound good? Okay. This is from a emailer. We won't dog them out and release the email, but they say, I subscribed to FITSNews several months ago. At that time, I thought the huge photos of Will Folks, Fowlkes, few extra letters there, buddy, were a little weird. Now there are videos of him droning on about his lack of sleep, sick kid, blah, blah. It's so boring and unnecessary. I didn't subscribe to the Will Folks, again, Fowlkes, fan page. Please don't ruin what is a really good publication with this endless and growing self-promotion. That's fair criticism. All right, I am pretty self-promotional. Sorry. But then I got another reader sent this comment, which I thought was kind of a different take. Will, wanted to compliment you on your new attire tune-up. Shelving the sports caps and the jackets for business professional shots was a wise decision. Boy, this guy doesn't know that I literally am only wearing this because I gave up hats for Lent. Yeah, if you're listening, that was my finger on the bald head there. Business attire is what belongs on a successful mover and shaker like you. Moving and shaking, baby. Oh, yeah. And you wear nice clothing well, looking as successful as you are. Man, is this a penthouse? It's a penthouse letter in the works here. Dylan, don't go that low. Don't go that low. Up, up, up. I hadn't been working out this week, man. Come on now. Also, you handle yourself very well in doing the live talking segments. Obviously, this one excluded. Your tone, expressions, and general calm but confident demeanor lend credibility to your message, as does your interview style. Thank you. Thank you. Your articles are fascinating reads. Even when I've thought the subject was of little or no interest to me, your well-turned words and quest for accountability lured my attention. Yeah, that might not be all I'm luring here. Compliments, sincere ones, deserve to be heard as you work hard carrying your business to even higher levels, and you deserve these, Will, respectfully. And it's signed a good friend from the Midlands. So that was very nice, friend. I appreciate that. And seriously, yeah, we appreciate the compliments, but we also appreciate the first guy who's sick of seeing my face, apparently. Which reminds me, if you are sick of seeing my face on the Week in Review, which how could you, ladies? Look. Seriously, I got the dimples and everything. But if you are sick of this face, Apple Podcasts and Spotify has got you covered. You can listen. You don't have to look at me. I don't know why anyone would want to do that. But anyway. So Apple and Spotify have us there. Also, what else were we going to cover? There's one other thing I'm completely forgetting, and Dylan is offering me absolutely no help right now. Oh, yeah, this was it. If you want to support what we're doing, if you want to support this show, if you want to support all of our video coverage, all of our content, please reach out to Andrea at FITSNews.com right here. She's our ad director, our marketing director. She can tell you exactly the offerings we've got available. We would love to have your support. But most importantly, just keep reading, keep listening, keep clicking, because we are, as that last commenter said, we're doing our very best to hold the corrupt institutions, corrupt politicians in South Carolina accountable for their actions so that the people of the state can get the justice that they deserve. We're going to keep doing that. We're going to hold everybody accountable. So if you want to support us in that effort, we would welcome that support. Thanks again for tuning in this week, and we'll check you next time on the Week in Review.